Welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going well. I fear we're going into Molly's sexy, sick voice again. So.
I was just going to ask you if you thought I had my sexy, sick voice
there you
back.
Go. So if anyone's aroused, I apologize, but you're in it. And so we're back. And so we have two great questions today at the Consummate Athlete Podcast. We thank you for joining us. We have a question about strength training and sort of how do we phase that in or out of the competitive season for cyclists, and probably runners would apply as well. And then what was the second question? I'm blanking on it.
It's all about whether or not you can still be sort of competitive and chasing performance goals without actually racing.
Right.
Which I think is honestly a great follow-up to the conversation we had earlier, or actually I guess late January, where we were talking about, can you continue to progress as you age? And I think this conversation we're going to have really speaks to the ebb and flow of like what being competitive and what performance means to you. Mm-hmm. And it's a question that honestly I deal with all the time because I'm very honestly, I'm pretty lackadaisical about racing. Like I've had, key races and whatnot, but like I would say I'm much more of a, race to train. Like I only put races on the calendar in order to train for them. Mm-hmm. But honestly, I would train whether or not I had them.
Sure. And so there's those subset of people. And then increasingly we have a lot of athletes that come to us and say, is it appropriate for me to get training? I don't really intend to do races. I maybe have an event or, a lot of the tours, European tours or a camp that they're going to. They're going to go to like a gravel camp and they just want to be really ready for it. That's their main event.
Well, actually, I do a lot of work with Ngamba, which we've talked about. If you want a cycling tour of a lifetime, cannot recommend enough. But one of the questions that that comes up all the time from people who want to do the tours is, am I fit enough for the tour? So we've actually been working with them to come up with maybe some training plans and everything. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons that one could want to, improve their fitness beyond just racing. Mm-hmm.
And it is, we're sort of making it all up, whether, even up into the top level of sport, right? These are all sort of arbitrary things we decide to do as humans. So you can sort of, decide on where your goalposts are, so to speak. Now, did we want to start with that, or what's their order that we're going to do now that we've preambled those?
I think let's start with the strength training and cycling, because I think this is probably like the question that a lot of people have, and I think this applies to strength training and running, so really like any endurance sport where you're training for the season. So the question is really, at what point in my training cycle should I begin to reduce the volume and intensity of strength training to prioritize cycling performance, especially as they're approaching key races or events. So there's a lot of listeners who are getting ready for one of these spring classics. So here we're thinking Paris to Ancaster. But even, and that Paris to Ancaster, when this comes out, is about 2 months away. But even thinking towards, an Unbound, a June race, I think this is a great question, especially for people up here, in Ontario, who've been spending a lot of the winter indoors and as a result have probably bumped up their strength training just to kind of not be on the trainer, 20 hours a week.
Now, yeah, I think this is a fantastic question. One of the reasons people will come to us for coaching or training plans is that we sort of embrace cross-training, which you can include strength training in cross-training. I don't generally do. I do try and differentiate them a little bit as a cycling coach, but in a lot of the research or the literature, you would see that those things are cross-training. They're not the sport. So there's the sport. Dan John would say, cyclists bike or bikers bike or throwers throw or runners run. So you have to keep the main thing. And so that is like the concept of specificity. And then the question is always like, what percentage then of my time should I spend on these other, accessory or cross-training activities? And then you have to be careful because you're like, are we going for performance or health or longevity or what's sort of the person's mix on that, which probably skews those numbers a little bit.
For sure. And I mean, certainly time limitations also kind of change how we would view someone, someone who has 5 hours a week to train for biking is going to get a very different kind of plan with regards to strength than someone who has 18 hours.
Which is the intriguing thing. I always like that it's not the prisoner's dilemma, but it's sort of this time, I always wanted, when we started the podcast, I think I even did ask some of the coaches that would come on, I'd say you had someone and you had to train them for mountain bike racing, 90-minute mountain bike race, and you only had 2 30-minute windows to train them. What would you do for workouts? And it's sort of an odd dilemma question to ponder. And what do you get from that? Maybe you get an idea of what the person thinks is really effective, but then what do you do with that? It is not entirely clear. And then if you actually do have more time, is it relevant? I don't know. But that would be the thing is, would someone ever choose something like strength training? Would you use those 2 30-minute windows for strength training if you had limited time?
I think both of us would probably say we'd use a few of those minutes as strength training.
So maybe you do like a circuit or something. Yeah, I don't know. It's like a really odd challenge. So that is the thing. And I can see how someone would be, maybe we have a bit more time. You're the person who has an hour a day to train, or 3 days a week you can train for an hour. And so you have your smart trainer. And then why wouldn't you do sweet spot for 3x1 hours to just maximize the calories you burn or something like that? Why would you bother doing strength training to do that? It's an interesting question. And so the challenge would be, maybe if you did do some strength training as part of that, maybe you wouldn't get cramping, or maybe you wouldn't get back pain or knee pain because you were doing more than sitting at a desk and then sitting on a bike all day, certainly an indoor bike even, right, to even like constrain that movement more. So I think that would be the rationale you would do even on the time limited person. And then I think the other reason you'll see a lot of time-limited people use is that it's more convenient at the gym. And so certainly a lot of our athletes we work with, they can access it in their condo or in their workplace or near their workplace. They can go to a gym in the middle of the day, but they can't ride their bike or even go for a run in the middle of the day.
It's true. That's what I love about strength training, especially as like a secondary workout of the day, is I can actually shower ahead of strength training, and what I do for strength does not leave me sweaty and like gross. So I can sort of get away with not needing, the second shower.
So if Molly were interviewing me for this, I would sort of quote this idea of like 10% of your time should be spent strength training. And could we debate this and really pick it apart? Probably. But I think I believe this comes from Dan John even too. We often mention things that Dan John says. And I think it just makes a lot of sense. So if you're doing 10 hours of training, 2 by 30-minute strength training would probably be sufficient. Now, could you add some yoga, some stretching, some core on top of that? Certainly. If you have back pain, or, everyone should probably do some clamshells and side planks every day just so they try and avoid the stuff that the physiotherapist is going to tell them to do. But that would be sort of a target. And I would keep that going through the year. If someone had 10 hours to train, certainly they could find 2 30-minute windows ahead of a bike ride or at lunch or something like that. And I think that would be a good use of your time. Even if that was maximum 10 hours of movement time, you're taking away an hour of my bike time. Sorry. I think that's a good expenditure when we're talking, especially to adults. But I think even with someone, a younger athlete, we would want to include some of the strength training, which could include jumps. It could include lots of these other movements, right? I think whether we call it mobility or health or longevity or whatever you want to call it, preserving your muscle mass, I think that's probably a pretty safe investment with an eye, again, because everyone listening does want to perform on their bicycle.
Okay, so with all of that said, how do you think about periodizing that throughout the year then? Is it just an hour all the time? Are we changing up the intensity but keeping it to the time? What does that look like, and how does this actually, come back to the question, bring this down to getting ready for race day? Yeah,
so the person who asked this question was more into strength training. So this would look like 3 by 1 hour for someone who maybe has 6 to 8 hours of training available. And so they're really almost 50%. So that definitely is skewed from that, maybe if we called that a rule of thumb. And so in the off season, I think that's something that if someone comes to me and is doing that, I would probably let them, or suggest they carry on with that, because we want to go with whatever our body and mind and routines are doing already. I'm always hesitant to change things that people are having success with. Now, as that person gets towards the season, that's a pretty high percent. Again, we're looking at maybe 10%, maybe 20%. We could use 80-20 rule or something, I guess, to skew that upwards. Someone who maybe does have a history of musculoskeletal injury, someone who is trying to keep muscle mass on, maybe a bit more of an eye towards strength. Then I would probably have them drop down where maybe we just skip one of those trips to the gym and they do 2 by 1 hour. Because again, it's something they enjoy. A lot of the people will be working with a personal trainer, so maybe they can drop down to 2. Or, if that just is an anchor of their life and they want to continue with that, then you could also, as Molly said, there's lots of things you could do within those 3 by 1 hours that could look a lot different. Those could be 3 by 1 hour yoga classes, which is different. The time still does elapse, which is usually where my first hesitancies with this goes as well. That is 3 by 1 hour, plus you have to get to the gym. That's a lot of potential bike time potentially. So we do have to be careful with that. But I would say in general rules of thumb, you could look at a Joe Friel training Bible type thing where we adapt to the strength, so it's a little higher rep, not pushing it too hard, and then you eventually get heavier and heavier, so the reps get lower, so you're maybe doing something like 10 heavy reps, so it might be 3 by 3 or something like that, 5 sets of 2 even, something in that lower rep range, under 5, 2 to 5 reps per set, so like a max strength. And then usually in the Joe Friel thing and a lot of periodization, you would start going towards maintenance, which can, in some systems, would look like it goes back lighter and it's more core or sort of oriented, which is okay. I think increasingly we're seeing that you actually want to preserve the intensity throughout the year. So it'd be thinking not pushing your weight up every week or doing more, but just can you do a set at that intensity or 2 sets at that intensity, and the time in the gym is spent more on maintaining. And then also, I was going to say like maintenance or mobility, right? So you have a good long warm up. We don't want to lose that warm up where you're doing all that nice dynamic flexibility and moving through all these, your arms are going over your head, your leg is going behind your body into extension. We're working on our calf, all the stuff you would do just in a normal strength warm up. We don't want to lose that. And indeed, that could be done anywhere in the world. So if you're traveling, that would be something that I just keep that rhythm as you're doing that daily, or again, even just 2 by 30-minute sessions throughout the week. That's like your active flexibility, mobility core workout. But then if you were in the gym, you could certainly warm up and do a heavy set of 5 or something like that at that level about that you've done in the past to try and preserve that strength and that power throughout the season. And that would be the idea of maintenance phases, is that they don't take a lot of time. They're not really stressful. You shouldn't be sore after them, but you're trying to preserve that strength as long as you can out through the season. And then again, you might choose a period of the year. Sometimes you'll do your big race, take a week or so off, and then go back into like a build or accumulation or base phase. And then that might be a time to even do a bit of more strength. Maybe you are back in the gym for 3 by 1 hour and pushing a little bit, and you're going to be tired and sore and grumpy. And then you taper it down again as you get closer to the race and get more specific again. So that would be roughly what I would do. But hopefully that idea of 10% and not making these workouts so long makes sense. And then Molly's question of sort of the, how do you play with the volume and the intensity across the year makes sense as well.
Perfect. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. All right, taking a hot second to talk about our sponsor, Payable. So if you've ever done a Google form for whether you're, collecting information for t-shirt sales or pizza day at school or, a jersey or race registration, and then you had to figure out how to actually collect money after that, just what a pain in the butt it is. And similarly, if you've ever tried to set up a, payment collection thing when all you need to do is just take this, really simple payment, and now you're in WooCommerce or Squarespace or any of these bigger whole website builds. You've probably been like, oh my gosh, this is too much for, I just wanted to sell my kids Girl Scout cookies. So there is a solution. It is the Payable add-on for Google Forms. This is this really cool add-on that a friend of ours invented. We've been working with him to develop templates for Google Forms for it for the last couple of years, and honestly, it's been ridiculously helpful. We've used it for jersey orders for Consummate Athlete. I use it for Strong Girl Publishing for in real life sales, event sales, when my authors want to sell their books in person, and they don't need to have a whole website to figure it out. They just need a way that it's very easy to check out a friend or family member or person they've met on the street that they've convinced to buy their books, which happens more often than you'd think.
And our local club, Mountain Bike Club, they use it just for their registration. So rather than using other membership things that require the club to have a login and then the users to have a login, there aren't logins. It's just a Google form that they're filling out, but then it still is able to help them get, a membership number or the membership paid at least and a name on a bunch of lists that's just eventually going to end up in a spreadsheet that someone's checking off at an event anyhow. So they use it for that, and it works so well. It's amazing how smoothly it just runs once you have it set up.
Yes, and we also have a whole template library over at payableapps.com. You can check it out, payableapps.com/athlete. And that one has a bunch of the templates that we helped create, but there's templates whether you're a teacher, a race organizer, an event coordinator, a personal trainer. There's so many use cases for it, from the little things like what we said, pizza day where you're collecting a couple bucks, all the way up to being able to do subscription payments and installment payments for much bigger products. So definitely check it out, payableapps.com/athlete. All right, back to the show. Okay, so our next question, which we talked about a little bit in the intro there, all about not being into racing right now. So question is, I've had less motivation to take a Saturday off of work, pay, drive, etc. to the race. Training has fallen by the wayside as a result. But I still do a lot of competitive group riding in town and miss being as strong as I was when I was racing lots. But I'm struggling to put in the hours that I did as a 24-year-old, which shocker.
And I guess that's the point. But yeah, I think the key thing really is that's the main question, right? Is it okay to be a competitive group rider?
Yes.
Yeah.
Period. And episode over. Done.
Well, I guess that's it, and it's very normal. That's when people come for coaching or training plans, and I don't know if this is something you do because they see someone doing a World Cup or something like that, and they assume that's coaching, and I get that, but I always use the analogy of golf coaching or masters swim coaching. In a lot of those cases, someone is not entering the PGA golf Masters Championship or something. They're just probably golfing with their friends every day. And swimming, a lot of times, maybe there is a competition at the end of it, but I don't think always. I think a lot of times it's, I want to be in the fast lane at Masters Swim, like make me faster for swimming. I want to feel competent at swimming. And I think with biking, it's very similar. You want to get into the group ride and be able to mix it up and have a few laughs and not be, the one holding everyone up, or you want to be the one just sending it off the front. There's all sorts of goals that come out of those group rides, and they can look a lot of different ways, but I think that's 100% worth it. Again, like now with this age of bike packing and FKT, it's all if World Cup racing in a circle isn't arbitrary, riding a certain distance and that someone told you about on the internet is pretty arbitrary. So it's all good. They're all arbitrary and also awesome.
I think really the main thing is finding a reason to train, because it sort of sounds like part of what this question is asking is actually just the lack of motivation for training is really what they miss. Like, it's not so much that clearly they do not miss the racing. What they actually miss is, having that like push to do their training. And I think this comes back to, figuring out a different why. And cycling is great because compared to golf, I'm going to just keep throwing golf under the bus here, or start throwing golf under the bus. Golf, and don't come at me, please, is probably not like the best longevity kind of sport that you can do in terms of like, oh, it's good for your aerobic system. It's really getting you, training several days a week. No, you're like driving around a golf course, unless you're like fast. What were they calling it? Speed golfing.
Yeah. Still think that's something I should try and get more into Canada, but we'll see.
Absolutely not. Anyway, point being, you might need to kind of reassess the why you're training, and if the group ride is motivating enough, that's fantastic. That's a perfect reason. It just sort of sounds like in this question, the group ride isn't actually enough to motivate the training like the way they want to be training. So I guess there's two parts here. Is like, is there another why? Is there something that's missing in the training, in the like not racing but the competitive side that you do want to work towards? Maybe this is more of like there's a bike packing adventure, or there is a fondo, or like some one race. I think also like people who were used to racing full seasons of road or mountain bike where they were racing most weeks, at some point that gets a little old, and life gets in the way and you can't do every weekend, but is there one race that's gonna, kind of light you up a little bit? Can we put one A race on the calendar and that's it? Or, are there other things that you want to train towards, whether that is adding in, more of that strength training to get that more like longevity perspective? Are there more fun things? So kind of that, figuring out what that why is. But then I think also, this is struggling to put in the hours I did as a 24-year-old. Yeah, that's life. I think that's a completely normal thing. So also doing the honest assessment of, what is a good good amount of training for me. And, shocker, it might not be what it was when we were 24 and didn't have a bunch of other responsibilities or didn't need, 9 hours of sleep in order to feel like a human. I think also just kind of backing up, taking stock and realizing that, you might still be training at almost the same intensity that you were at 24. It just doesn't look like it on paper because it's less hours and, technically speaking, literally less power, but you're still actually putting in the same, exertion. You're as tired as you were when you were 24. If that makes
the
sense.
strain could be higher, right? That would be
strain. That's the word.
Where you could use the cup or the sponge analogy, and you'd say, you're maybe a little smaller sponge, so you can't absorb as much water. The water being the training load. And then it can only absorb so much, right? So you don't need as much to fill up the sponge, and the sponge can only take so much. So sometimes that's a good analogy. The cup is maybe sometimes easier to visualize. We're all different size cups, and you can overflow the cup easily. And as a master's athlete, there's a lot of other stuff, lots of water that goes in your cup, which is all the different stressors. So that's from work and kids and everything else. So I think that's sometimes the way to look at it, is that strain can make sense. But as far as the question, do you think that's moving us in the correct direction here?
I think so. So the question, I didn't finish reading it because it's a fairly long, in-depth question, but it actually ends with this great line where they say they're just looking to repattern the good training habits. And you actually just we have a post coming out this week, or I guess last week by the time this episode airs, that was about what to do if you've kind of already failed at and I'm putting failed.
Not even if, when you fail something, that's I think an important part of training, right? Is failing.
Yeah. So I almost look at that last sentence as, when you say looking to repattern the good training habits, sounds to me like they already had the good training habits. And I think often when we fall away from something, or when we even take one day off from it, there's this I'm crap. I am a garbage monster of a human and just the worst. And now I need, new year, new me energy. What is that called? The fresh start effect or whatever it is?
That,
yeah. Because we feel like we've fallen so far, but really this sounds like maybe they've just, trained a little bit less lately and are just a little bit lower motivation. And I think the ebb and flow of that is natural. And like you say, it's not if you fail your goal, it's when you.
Well, I think it would be good training if periodically a interval workout gets the best of you. I don't know what the split is. We've talked about that rule of thirds that I think Alexi Pappas sort of popularized there, where sort of a third you feel great, a third are just normal, and then a third are sort of really bad or don't feel great. And along with that, you might just not get through a whole set. And sometimes I'll use the example of strength training. It's very common. The last set of 8, you get 7. And then the next time you come back and you try and get 8, that's a weekly goal or a training goal you could set. And so with biking, it's the same. If you miss one interval or you're 10 watts lower today, that's fine. Again, to Molly's strain idea, maybe just your body wasn't able to take on that extra load today. And so you just take the appropriate amount of strain. Strain is related to sort of the feeling, right? That's why we never lose our feeling or that perceived exertion, the RPE, is that your body just isn't the same day to day. So we have to adjust week to week. And again, that's what lets us come back next week, is to try again. I will often do 4x8 intervals. They're just, the classic Steven Seiler. I think it's classic now. I don't know. Those weren't that long ago, but pretty popular sort of set of intervals. Sometimes I do them harder. Sometimes I do the easier. Sometimes I do 5. Sometimes I do 3. Sometimes it's 9 minutes because the hill's a little longer or I'm a little slower going up the hill. But you learn a lot because it just can't always be better. Some days I feel it feels like the end of the world to get through those 4. And sometimes it goes by so quickly and I just feel, effortless. And I think that's what you learn by training is wow, like this body just undulates, and sometimes I have to really talk myself through it, and sometimes, like, again, it just goes by and it just happens, and it's like effortless, right? So I think that's why we train. And so that could be a very intrinsic, reason to train, is for the training purpose itself. And then you could also, to this question about group riding, is, the group rides could motivate why you're training, to be ready for the group rides, so that we could get into the nitty gritty of that week as well. But to Molly's point, you may also have to then add in something like, a lot of the athletes we work with in this sort of group riding with friends, preparing just to ride better, they will have a trip, again, European trip, some sort of trip like an Ngamba thing. They want to be ready to just really enjoy, is often what they say. They don't want to win it, but they want to get through it and enjoy. They don't want to be struggling every single minute of the entire thing. The mountain bike stage races are often used in this way. Like, they're not trying to win the stage race. They just want to go through the entire BC bike race. It's like a bucket list type event. And then the other ones will be, like you say, like the BT. We have a BT 700. It's about 800K here in Ontario of bike packing. Very, very hilly, and it's like a big ordeal for a lot of people to go around that in a few days. So yeah, they want to be ready for that. And so that's like, okay, there's some adventure, there's some time with friends, some time in nature, and then the group rides are sort of sprinkled in there. So very quickly, we sort of have like the A races we were talking about just recently in an episode, the priority of events. I try and say events more often than we say races. So it might be something like a big tour or bike packing trip. And then also every single week from May till August, you're hitting this group ride on Saturday, and you want that to be hard. And are they workouts? They're a little bit of workouts, but they're also like, that's the thing that you're preparing for when we're talking about this in January and February, which we are, is that you're getting ready for May till August competitive season, which is just every Saturday you're smashing at the group ride. And then we have, okay, that's the season. So then we can build your week so that you're smashing on Saturday, because we have to be careful that you're not smashing every other day of the week, because it's now your competitive season. So now, like, our first question around strength training is relevant. You wouldn't want to go bust a 5x5 heavy squats on Friday and then go to the group ride. You're going to be very muscularly tired. So this is where some of those little micro pieces to our training cycles, our micro cycle, is relevant, right? We need to think, what is the goal for the year? And so you can see how, even though this person isn't racing in the World Cup, we've built a whole season. We have that whole seasonal plan. We have the bike packing. We have the May to August group rides we want to smash at. And then we can ask the question of, like, what should our training look like in February, March, April to prepare our base, our general preparation. And then once we get into the season, what should we do? What should we do on a Monday? What should we do on Tuesdays to make those Saturdays go really well and hold on to our fitness across? That's a long competitive season, right? So how do we hold on to that?
Yeah, and the other thing I thought was interesting in this question, again, this is like, you haven't heard this part yet, is, okay, so they say, I've been able to do quality training January to April and then hit a wall in May when work turns into 55 plus hour work weeks and I'm just burned out. So I think this goes exactly to your point is, okay, if group riding starts in May, that means we can, spend this quality training time January to April getting ready for that. And in May, we can really ratchet back. So it actually is almost like every week is, similar to what we'd have in mountain bike season or cyclocross season, where it is every week is almost like resting, like tapering to get ready for the weekly group ride on Saturday. If work is 55 hours a week, like, I think, this really goes to, if you actually have this predictable year, teachers have this, accountants have this around, April and tax time. I think a lot of the time, everyone kind of thinks of this year as, this very like linear, like every month has to have kind of the same amount of effort, except maybe like one off season. We'll give you like one off season month.
Sometimes not.
Sometimes not. Probably often, not. Forget that. Never mind. I take it back. But everyone just kind of assumes everything has to be like this straight line, flat line, or it has to be going up. Mm-hmm. And if it's not going up, then it's a problem. But if you know that in May, that's like the most hectic time of your work year, then okay, that's fine. We can plan around that.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to know a bit more about it, but I'd be tempted to say that's like a spring classic in April you try and get to, or like maybe you go away. A lot of people will go away in our area. People will go away sort of for a spring camp or trip or both. in March, April, something like that. And then maybe May is just, this is where, again, sort of knowing when to back off a little bit. And you might just not go to the group ride, which is tough because there's social elements tied in there. But there's no accumulating points in the group rides either, right? It's not like, it's not the World Cup. So there's really no point in being, you don't have to be at all of them. You can pick and choose. And so sometimes it's that, I'll bug people to sometimes take a week off every 4 weeks of the group ride, or just ride in the C group, if there's the fast group and then the slower group, for lack of a better term. I apologize, but just don't just deload the week in the same way we deload our strength, or we take a week off. There's 3 build weeks is the traditional sort of Joe Friel periodization type thing. So in the same way, we can do that with weekly races and group rides, so that again we can preserve that motivation throughout the season. This person, if they're working that many hours, right, it just, I would worry that if that's a recurring thing that they burn out in May. So either just take that as your off season, or just do a bit of endurance and just maintain and again, maybe ride in the easier group ride and just don't measure. Like, it's not because you're slow, it's because you're holding on to, your cup is full. This is the analogy. We don't want the cup to overflow. So just holding on to it. This is a red light, yellow light period where you're just being cautious. And then it sounds like maybe in June, July, August, you could just go build back into that. And if you do a good job in May, sleeping well, eating well, just holding on, maintaining, then I see no reason that you couldn't just ramp right back up May, and then in June, and then get July and August, you're flying. And again, like, if you're the one who's fast all summer, that's pretty awesome too, right? Maybe everyone else has already burnt all their matches at the first group rides. So yeah, I would think that's, again, where the cycling season, the competitive season doesn't fit perfectly, but the freedom you have by not doing organized races and doing these group rides is that you can really, again, it's all arbitrary. So it's 100% up to you to pick the thing that, inspires you and works with your life. So, on the same, a lot of these athletes that we work with, the summer, actually, they'll do more like vacation, and they're almost, reverse of what we would expect for cycling, right? Where they take some of the winter months off. They might actually, just like this person said, their focus is so good January, February, March, and then they burn out. Now, I guess that would be the only other caution as I talk through that is maybe they're pushing too hard January, February, March as well. So you want to be careful that you're not like the trainer burnout person.
Mm-hmm. Okay, love that. Hopefully that's some good food for thought. As always, keep the questions coming. You can find us over at Consummate Athlete on Instagram, consummateathlete.com. And as we, we're heading into racing season, spring classics are coming. And if this like weekly group ride thing does appeal to you, and you're like, I do want to be in shape for the weekly group rides, we do have a plan for that. So we will include a link to that over in the show notes. So definitely head to this wherever you listen to it, in iTunes, Spotify, on Consummate Athlete, wherever. All right. Thanks so much for tuning in, and happy training. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.